Hello, I'm Alice Hutchinson, the owner of Birds Books, an independent bookstore in Bethel, Connecticut, and I'm honored to be the host of Write America. The aim of this series is to help set the country back on a correct, productive course of freedom, justice, equality, and plain human kindness. Write America is a literary series created by author Roger Rosenblatt, featuring award-winning, nationally renowned authors and new and emerging writers in reading and conversations each week about how books and art might bridge the deep divisions in our nation. Write America celebrates the quiet power of art in our lives, the unifying power of the highest uses of language. In novels, stories, essays, and poems, we recognize one another as parts of the human family, one family. In light of the recent world events, Roger has penned a letter I would like to read. Dear friends, we never say there are no words when met with a horror such as the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because words are what we do, and we depend on their power to save us from the Putins of history. No luck so far, but we keep at it. And the best and clearest use of words at this moment is to protest. We protest. The writers of Write America protest. We began as a protest against what's going on in our own country, and now we protest with Ukraine. Implicit in all our readings until the right prevails is the belief that strength of thought, feeling, and language can knock back any invader. Let it be so. Love, Roger. So with that, I welcome you. And please join us every Monday evening at this time as many of the most beloved and distinguished writers in the country read from their works and talk to each other and with you in an effort to bring us together. If you missed last week's episode with Roger Z and Alice McDermott or any of the previous episodes of Write America, you can go to Birds Books Crowdcast channel and watch the recordings at any time. Tonight's episode is also being recorded, so if you missed something, you can go back and rewatch. Tonight, Birds Books hosts a reading by and a conversation with Grace Schulman, Samyak Shertok, and Jennifer Haigh. I will return at the end after the readings and discussion to bring your questions and comments to the authors. For those of you unfamiliar with Crowdcast, the chat is to the right of your screen. I'm sure many of you have found it already. Please feel free to comment throughout the evening. But if you have a question, there's a tab at the bottom that says Ask a Question. That's where I will go to look for your questions to ask the authors at the end of their discussion this evening. Also to the bottom is a green tab with a link to this episode on our Birds Books website, where you can go to learn more about the authors and to order a book. Now a little about our first speaker. Grace Schulman, winner of the Frost Medal for Distinguished Lifetime Achievement in American Poetry, is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. She is the author of 8 collections of poems and a memoir, Strange Paradise, Portrait of a Marriage. Formerly poetry editor of The Nation and director of the Poetry Center, 92nd Street Y, she is distinguished professor of CUNY's Baruch College. Her newest poetry collection, The Marble Bed, was released in October of 2020. Please welcome to the screen, Grace Schulman. There you go.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, and thank you for your dedication to poetry, to literature. It helps us survive. And I'm inspired by Roger Rosenblatt's statement that it's our job to protest. But by protest, I don't believe he means direct political protest at all, of which we're not really expert. But as he says in his statement, protest the belief that strength of thought, feeling, and language can knock back any invader. Let it be so. And Write America's protest, for me, is in the humanity, in the human feelings translated into language, which are conveyed and which bring us all together. I'm going to read tonight new poems that I've never read before. And these new poems are going to be in a new book forthcoming in November. It's called Again the Dawn, New and Selected Poems. The Dawn, Robert Frost said that every poem is an idea in the dawning. And dawn, for me, is poetry. It's the task of poetry, always. Derek Walcott wrote, "For every poet, it is morning in the world." I'm going to get into my poems in just a moment, please. This is a new poem called Scallop Shell. See them at low tide, scallop shells glittering on a scallop-edged shore, whittled by water into curvy rows, the shape of waves that kiss the sand only to erode it. Today I walked that shoreline, humming Camino Santiago, the road to St. James's tomb, where pilgrims traveled, scallop badges on their capes, and chanted prayers for a miracle to cure disease. And so I, stirred by their purpose, hunted for scallop shells, shaped like pleated fans, with mouths that open and close to steer them from predators. I scooped up a fan and blew off sand grains, thinking, for that one moment, of how St. James's body rose from sea decked with scallops, and of this empty beach in another austere time. Let this unholy pilgrim implore the scallop shell, silvery half moon, save us. This next poem is called Tessera. Beach stones lick wet sand like gleaming commas, ivory eggs, ant-sized silvery beads, and red ochre clocks wash in from mountains, their ancestors. They are, well, forgive me, chips off the old rocks. Stones are tooled by the ocean, the master jeweler, carrying the same for quartz and bottle caps. Stuck on land, stones cast tear-shaped shadows that vanish after dark, just as my footsteps disappear with each new wave on shore. Stone-faced, they conceal an inner wildness with memories of shipwrecks, cholera, gulls' broken wings, and shorelines that erode. In fallow times, I'll scan the sea for answers. Silence, then the message of the stones. Outer blankness, inner fire. The Roman artist who searched for tessera, wooden bits, glass shards, and cracked shells, must have known that beach stones, seemingly dull, would shimmer when grouted in cement for mosaics, flaming in yellow gold. This last poem that I'll read is called Confessions of a Nun. A young woman named Monique Bourgeois was an art student who went to work for Henri Matisse, the sculptor. She later became a nun, and this is her story. The poem is spoken by her. It's a persona poem. Confessions of a Nun. Yes, I loved Matisse. He made it for me, you know, this church of glass and fire. Now when the sun rolls rectangles on floors through windows painted yellow, I remember the yellow broom we stumbled through each morning when we climbed this hill, and how he stirred to greens and scrub weeds, white in the anemones, and blues in the sliver of sea beyond rock terraces. He owned his loves, his Vance, I his Monique, nurse, disciple, Rose. But who was I? Harsh words we had a few. I had to leave for me, myself, my holy vows. If I belonged to anything, it was, how could I tell him, someone larger? Il faut y avoir plus. There must be more. Later, he aged, arthritic, waiting for the angel to wound him. None appeared. But when my sisters called for a new chapel, I drew a priest he painted on a wall while belted to his chair. I tied a brush to a long twig, strapped it to his arm, and watched him paint anger in daring strokes. An outsized poppy, the Virgin and Child, a monk. Rage for lost years, for feud to come. Why does he think his work is never finished? And yet he scored, what is it? Pitié. Not for him. He told me once in wartime, his daughter captured, tortured for her fight in the Maquis. He wept at home, alone, all the while painting joy in reds and whites. Now in this blue-green-yellow chapel, seeing the late day sunlight on the sketches of plane trees, priestly vestments, and an altar the color of risen bread, I knew at last that just as he held my vows in his great hands, he, godless, will work it out with God. Thank you. Thank you.
No, Grace, thank you. Our second speaker is Samyak Shertok. Samyak Shertok's poems appear or are forthcoming in Best New Poets, Blackbird and Cincinnati Review, Gettysburg Review, Hayden's Ferry Review, the Iowa Review, KRO Online, New England Review, Shenandoah, Waxwing, and elsewhere. His work has been awarded the Robert and Adele Schiff Award for Poetry, the Tucson Festival of Book Award for Poetry, the AWP Intro Journals Award, a finalist for the National Poetry Series and the Jake Adam York Prize, and a nominee for the Pushcart Prize, the Best Small Fictions, and Best of the Net. He has received fellowships from Aspen Words, the Virginia G. Piper Center, and the Vermont Studio Center. Originally from Nepal, he is currently a poetry fellow at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown and a PhD candidate in literature and creative writing at the University of Utah, where he is a Stephenson Cannon Fellow. Please welcome to the screen, Samyak Shertok. There you go.
So I've been told Crowdcast is not like my Wi-Fi. So if there's a lag between the audio and video, Alice suggested that perhaps one could simply...
It sounds perfect right now.
Sounds perfect, great. But if it happens as I'm reading, you can simply close your eyes and think of that as some kind of radio. So I'll read 3 poems. The first one is about my mother tongue, which is Tamang, and my mother tongue does not have a script. How to skyberry your mother tongue. Let it be said, Amma was the last Himalayan beekeeper. When she harvested honey barehanded in the stone house we lived in, She took not juniper smoke, but song to the hive. A home is one flower and 1,000 stings. The bees flew into her oiled black hair, and when she combed it, down fell rhododendrons. Let it be said, not a single bee stung her. The summer before I left home, she fed me raw honey from her palm every night. In the dark, I learned to hold bees in my throat, one for every ancestor. Let it be said, not a single bee died. Now, every time I forget the word of the horse ghost, a bee stings my windpipe. With every pierced bee, Ama becomes more smoke. Nila ta, nila mang, nila ting, nila sa, nila mu, suni tuntu kuku. Let it be said, if you plunge your hand into an abandoned hive, you will still get stung. At night, Ama plucks stingers from my tongue with her nails. Each barb she binds with her lock, and her crown grows more torn than rhododendron. Let me release them into the wild sky, Ama, where they belong. Double born of milk, of nickly foam, she hums, filling the wounds with wet clay. Your mouth is our last hive. The second poem is anti-war poem or war poem. It's about the Maoist revolution in Nepal, and very sadly, it's also, and unfortunately, very relevant to the present day. Um, and this is a form I'm sort of working with, and for now I'm calling it Gazaban. It's essentially a modified Haibun where the haiku is replaced by a ghazal couplet at the end. Um, in a time of revolution, never wear red, never wear gold star. When someone asks you where you live, point at the neighbor's house. At the checkpoint, when they ask you where you're coming from, say home. After football, when the goalie says, I wish the king were dead, don't join the chorus of long live the king, or he's the Vishnu incarnate, he will never die. At sundown, unplug the landline. Before going to bed, leash the dogs. Practice praying on your knees. If you're not home by midnight, go to the neighbor's house. Never leave the house without burning a butter lamp at Sangye's feet and your student ID. When someone tells you, doesn't your Ama teach social studies at the secondary? Say, no, she sells Yarsa Gumba at the bazaar. Never carry a red book. If you find our bed empty when you wake up, don't go to the police. Bolt the windows before listening to the radio. Practice praying with open eyes. Never carry your textbooks in a one-polar backpack. If you see us being led away by two boys on the street, think they are my neighbor's parents. When a soldier points the rifle at your heart, don't you know this is the curfew hour, and takes his sweet time with the frisk? Look at the stars and think, his hand is my hand. Think, I'm searching myself. If we aren't back after a week, call the Kathmandu Post. When you hear from a window, we have a letter for you from your Appa, keep walking. Bury the batteries beneath the persimmon. Burn the one-polar backpack. When someone at school asks you what your Appa does, say he's dead. Practice praying prostrate. Never draw the curtains when there's still light. When someone asks you what you believe in, don't say the street dogs that stopped barking. At the checkpoint, when they ask you where you're going, say home. The year the war ended, I swallowed 9 Bodhi seeds and left my fatherland. Yam between 2 boulders, vultures, fatherless, oh, bereft my fatherland. Alice, I'm not sure how I'm doing time. Do I have time for just one more? Is that
Yes, sir, you do.
okay? One more. And I want to thank Alice, of course, Bird's Books, Lindsay, Roger, and especially Molly. And such an honor to be reading with Grace and Jennifer. Thanks so much for having me. And of course, thank you for all the 40 people for watching, listening. Because the 40 includes us as well, so maybe fewer than 40. This last poem is called 108 Doors. Amma buried a lock of hair in the mountain and watered it with her tear. I will not move until there's a home. The jackal yawned, and there was a door. And there was the horse ghost walking out of it. If we're all looking for a door, if every door is a wound mistaken for a meadow, the monk knocked. Who wakes the house of lotus? I, your seeker, the lotus drowned in the lake of sacred tears. The door cannot remember its mother tongue, so it swallows bodies. Every day it gets bigger, every day it grows hungrier. A mouth rooted, hinge dark, we walk in and become its language. Before I walked out of Amma, a door stole my brother. Before Amma could lock a loom, a door. Before Amma could lock a loom, the Miklifum swallowed me. I wept like my Amma had left me, says my Amma, and the crow spat you out. If it's the door that keeps the doorkeeper instead. Enter or exit, we always leave the door behind. In that way, the door is more human than us. When Ayodhya would not open its gates for the Agni-lit Sita, she began walking. Where she stopped, the ground parted. Sita, born of furrow, earthborn. The door chooses us, and we walk in hoping to find what? God, a cup of buttered tea, bones of an extinct bird, the beloved humming in the other room, the fireflies that danced around us in the pine dark, which we crushed in our fists to see if our fingers glowed. The door is a sky bisected with desire. Orpheus looked back from a door too soon, and when he reached for his only song, a black pomegranate. The eye is the door to sin, said the book of God. The eye shall be killed, said the man of God, and emptied 2 oil lamps into his eyes. In his deathbed, his devotees asked him for a final teaching. I wish to look at my eyes for one last time. The door is not a Lethean mercy. Inside or outside, where we are facing, a walking door of ash, we go from house to house, rummaging the ruins of our childhood home for buckwheat seeds, our Amma's heirloom anklet. Beneath every threshold, bones of a nation buried alive. The lintel carved with names writ in swallowed documents. The door is a wake of live vultures. Once a woman pierced an apple to eat God flesh. Once a woman pierced me. She sewed the hole with a lock of her hair, an unspooling mouth. This way I can always return to you. Narcissus stared into a door too long and tore himself into zero. In the dream, I'm inside a stone house. etched on each rock a name of the disappeared. To get out, I have to recite every name. I begin, the door opens like an arrowhead. I swallow Appa's bodhi seed every time his hand could not open. Some days after a sudden rain, the door holds us for the briefest of moments with its sweet nothing, and a face we thought was ours falls into the shore. Every face we ever held in our hands, a door for us to keep our own face whole. The doer is, says Ramana, the sufferer. The martyr is a witness for whom? Give me back my brother, I say. The door says, which one? I feel most political when I'm entering a door. I bury the anklet in the buckwheat field for my unborn Burkani to return from the earth when I'm gone. The door is a mother, it follows. What I'm trying to say is, I am one of her 6 children, you, my only mother. Finally, we arrive at not home or the other shore, but another door. No return, the oval, we turn and turn, haunted by the first zero, our throat failing to split into a keel. 7 lifetimes later, the monk returned. Who wakes the house of lotus? You, beloved, only you. The calyx opened, the monk himself holding a sacred tear. He drank the tear from his own hand, he who was thus arrived. The door is always inside. The door is whether we are or not. If we are all a door, at night faceless ancestors come and go gossiping of old. Every door takes us back to the valley of rhododendrons where jackals cock howls on blue sirens. What I'm trying to say is you walked in and the door was no more. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Our third guest is Jennifer Haigh. Jennifer Haigh's first novel, Mrs. Kimball, won the PEN Hemingway Award for debut fiction. Her later books include the Bakerton trilogy, Baker Towers, News from Heaven, and Heat and Light, which trace the rise and fall of a Pennsylvania coal town, and 3 Boston novels, The Condition, Faith, and most recently, Mercy Street, which was published the beginning of this month. Her work has been recognized by the National Endowment for the Arts, the Guggenheim Foundation, the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and has been published in 18 languages. She lives in Boston. Please welcome to the screen, Jennifer Haigh. Let me find where you are, Jennifer. There you go.
Thank you, Alice. It's such a pleasure to be reading here tonight with Samyak and Grace. And I want to thank Alice and Roger Rosenblatt and also Suchita Nayar, who was the agent that brought me into this group. So I'm very glad to be here. So Mercy Street is a novel very recently published that draws on my own experience working as a volunteer at a women's clinic that, among other things, performed abortions. This novel centers on a character named Claudia Birch. She is a counselor at a clinic very much like the one where I volunteered. In this scene, she's going to have lunch with her ex-husband. She's running late because she's just answered a threatening call to the hotline at work. The deli was packed at midday, hungry people lurking in the vestibule. The overflow crowd spilled onto the sidewalk. Elderly couples, women pushing strollers, loud-talking men in suits. All day long, the place smelled of breakfast, bacon and coffee and fried potatoes. Every few months, Phil dragged Claudia there for lunch. As far as she could recall, he was the only person who'd ever cared what she ate. When they were married, it drove her crazy. After their divorce, it was the thing she missed the most. He'd been her college boyfriend, first lover, starter husband. They married the summer after graduation and lasted 2 years. She was a divorced person. It was her natural state, preferable, she felt, to either alternative. Marriage didn't appeal to her in any way, and yet she was glad to have tried it. If she were 43 and never married, she might attach undue importance to the fact. Her never marriedness might seem the root of all sorrow, the cause of every small dissatisfaction in her fortunate and mostly happy life. "Sorry I'm late," she said as they waited for a table. "The phone rang just as I was leaving. It got complicated." She explained about the suspicious caller, the angry husband. "I don't like the sound of this," Phil said. "Be careful." What would careful look like? It was an honest question. At the clinic, they took every precaution imaginable. She felt incapable of greater care. "I'm serious, Claudia. What are you going to do if he shows up there?" "Oh, he won't. People say things on the phone that they'd never say to your face. Honestly, it was nothing." "You said that last time." "Well, last time was also nothing." "If I were you," Phil said, "I'd get myself a gun." "Seriously? Can you seriously imagine me pulling a gun on someone?" "You'd do what you had to do," Phil said. "I would lose my shit." They had known each other 25 years. How could he not know this? It suggested that he hadn't been paying attention, that he had no idea who she really was. They slid into a booth and glanced at the menu, which Phil knew by heart but studied for pleasure. Early in his career, he'd reviewed restaurants for the Globe and had single-handedly put several out of business. But the deli never disappointed. The dumplings and brisket and homely kugels were to him the pinnacle of human culinary achievement. Claudia could remember when these foods seemed exotic to her. In rural Maine, pre-internet, even bagels were unheard of. It wasn't like that anymore. No place was. It was hard to believe now how little they had known of the world, how isolated they'd been. "I drove past the clinic the other day," said Phil. "There must have been 50 people out there." 36, she said. "It's Lent. They'll be out there until Easter." She reached for her phone to show him a photo. "See? No more buffer zone. Now they come right up to the door." For years, protesters had to stay 50 feet from the clinic's entrance, a Massachusetts law recently overturned by the courts. Now they could crowd around the door, praying and singing to their heart's content, cursing and screaming and speaking in tongues. Their insults and obscenities were protected under the First Amendment. Unless they laid hands on a patient or threatened to or physically barred her from entering, the law was on their side. It was up to the patient, whatever her physical or emotional condition, to muscle her way through. When Claudia explained this to Phil, he looked incredulous. "You're kidding me, that's legal?" The son and grandson of attorneys, he believed reflexively, unconsciously, in the overarching wisdom of the law. That the law could be short-sighted or capricious or simply wrong was an impossible thought. "It is now," said Claudia. "Do I like whitefish?" "That's outrageous. Someone's going to get killed." Phil had an eye for calamity, an actuarial sense of all that could go wrong in life. Identity theft, radon leak, Bell's palsy, tsunami, heat stroke, spinal meningitis. It seemed like a complicated way to live. "Claudia," Phil said, "are you sleeping?" "Right now?" "In general." "I sleep enough." This was a blatant lie, but talking about her insomnia made her anxious, which, in the end, made it harder to sleep. Phil signaled the waitress. "You can't keep this up, you know. This job is killing you. You don't know how you can work there." It was tiring to have these conversations. "Look," Phil said, "I'm on your side. You know I have no problem with abortion, assuming there's a good reason." "Well, there's always a reason," she said. "Define good." The reasons were many and varied. Occasionally, a patient would volunteer hers, as though trying to convince herself. "My son is autistic and daycare won't take him. I can't handle another kid. I got fired, evicted. I got into law school. I'm afraid to go off my meds. I just need to finish high school, chemo, probation, my PhD, my tour of duty. My mother would never forgive me. I want a different kind of life." "Last summer, we had a call on the hotline," Claudia said. "A 603 number, so New Hampshire. She told me that if her ex found out she was pregnant, he'd come to her house and shoot her kids." Phil looked up from the menu. "Now, I don't know. It's possible she was delusional, or a compulsive liar? Honestly, I have no idea. All I know is what she told me. At the corner of her eye, Claudia saw, at last, a waitress approaching their table. The point is, what's a good reason? Who gets to decide? Phil ordered the brisket. Thank you. Hi, guys. I very much enjoyed hearing both of you read. It's always hard to be the prose writer who follows two glorious poets. So thank you for those readings.
I had a great time listening to you both. Thank you.
I'll just second third everything you guys have just said. Yeah, I think Jennifer, the thing about following one genre, following the other, and I on the other hand always worry following a prose writer because, like for some reason my poetry is sort of by default a bit earnest, and so if the prose writer is like really humorous, like I just feel bad for changing that tone to something something serious. So I kind of always like to go before those writers who sort of are really good at humor and satire and whatnot.
But your poetry has a wonderful sense of story, Samyak. So it's really, you're a storytelling writer as well. So in that way, it's not so different.
I was just thinking that your prose has a wonderful sense of poetry.
Oh, wow, how lovely. That's simply the best compliment a prose writer can receive from a poet. So thank you for that. I read a lot of poetry. I feel like it shames me into writing better. Prose writers read poetry. It sort of reminds you where the bar is and all that can be accomplished in a single line. So it's really an education. It educates the ear.
Sometimes I wonder if there's really a distinction between them. Good work is good work. The genre seems to be secondary. People so often speak of poetry and fiction, but actually poetry is fiction. It didn't happen.
Right.
It's
Right. They're all inventions. Yes.
So it's prose fiction and poetry fiction. The difference is minimal.
I mean, I don't know how much people, buy Wordsworth's manifesto, but he clearly establishes that there is really no difference between poetry and prose, except for the line itself. And this is very interesting because when we get to prose poem, if it is all the way to the end of the page, the line also kind of becomes sort of that distinction also disappears to a certain extent.
Yes, and there are forms and there are received forms, traditional forms, and all of that. But I just think it's a secondary consideration. You're moved by literature, and whether you're moved by Whitman or John Donne or James Joyce, the genre seems less important than being moved by the work itself.
I agree with that, Grace. And I think all good writing has in common that it is rhythmic in some way. And so, it's you can see it on the page when you look at a poem more so than you can see it in prose. But when you listen to it, that's the thing it has in common. It's rhythm.
Rhythm, yes. Rhythm, somebody speaking, the diction, the voice of who is speaking. The speaker of a poem is a character, as in fiction. I think of it that way. It sure ain't me.
Speaking of voice, I was going to ask Jennifer, often like the students, the beginner students, they will always ask about how do I distinguish like true characters from the voice itself? And I haven't done a lot of prose writing, but that's something is very challenging and very different from poetry in a way, except for maybe the persona form, which definitely again bleeds into the other genre. But I was curious, like um, how far do you go? Like the risk is like when we have like certain phrases that some character uses again and again, or some kind of that kind of sort of uh, um, kind of like very idiosyncratic phrase that a character uses that also feels a bit contrived. And when I teach creative writing prose and dialogue, I always tell them, if you remove the dialogue tags, can you still tell who is speaking when? But as a writer, I was curious how you approach that challenge.
I think that's a very good test to give your students, to take away the dialogue tags and see if you can tell. There are a few things I do. When I'm writing a novel, I keep a running list of the words that each of my characters favor, because we all do this, right? We have, certain expressions or even certain vocabularies that we have, say, because of our education or the work we do, certain regionalisms, those kind of quirks of speech. I keep track of those for each of the characters, and that helps me pay more attention to it. I also read out loud all the time when I'm writing, and until I can hear the characters in my head, then I'm not going to get it right on the page. But I have to listen to the line. I can't just write it. And over time, I can hear the differences in the character's speech, and also, as you say, make that distinction between the character's speech and the narrative voice of the story, which is a different thing.
Sure.
Thank you. I remember Cam Houston when I took a class with her, she would say on dialogue, she would say, "This is one time the character gets to speak for themselves. So do not screw that one." And for me, that has always stuck with me, that finally they have a voice, and you want to honor that voice as much as you can, right?
Yeah, I always tell my students that, we think that good dialogue sounds realistic, and yes, that's part of it, but it has to be better than that, because I always send them out to eavesdrop on people in cafes and write down what people actually say, and it's really boring. So much of common speech is really not revelatory or brilliant in any way. And so I tell my students, well, it should sound like real speech, but be more brilliant. And I think that's irritating advice for them to be given, but it's true. You want the illusion of real speech, but it needs to be revelatory in the way that we just don't often do in real life.
Who are your favorite writers who write your favorite dialogue writers?
I think Toni Morrison wrote wonderful dialogue. I think Faulkner wrote wonderful dialogue. And in fact, I think of them very much as companion writers who are best read side by side. And they both had that wonderful ear for speech. And there's a great deal you can learn from that. I also think Alex McDermott writes really wonderful dialogue. I'm a huge fan of hers.
I would say Scott Fitzgerald.
Yes.
A line like, "That's the kind of thing that makes you think." Spoken by rather disheveled character.
Dennis Johnson wrote some great dialogue as well. He had a real ear for it.
So he's Jesus' son. I mean, every story is like insane, right?
Yeah. They're just, that's one of those books that I think I read once a year. It's just I keep finding new things in it. It's just a perfect collection.
Grace, I was reading some of your poems online, and on Poetry Foundation, it seems several of your poems. I always worry with labeling type of poetry, but like for this lack of better term, like sacred poetry or devotional poetry. And I was wondering how one of the challenges for me, I'm also really interested in mysticism and devotion. But when it comes to writing poetry, sacred verse, for me, one challenge is I always worry, like, am I sort of is this a painkiller and not actually healing the wound? Is it just a sort of an illusion of healing? Is like sometimes that's something I worry, and I wonder what kind of challenges you face or how you approach devotional poetry in general.
I'm an adherent of W.H. Auden when he writes poetry has to praise for being and doing and all it is. And I can't stop praising. Rilke says this too. I praise it. What if the world is full of disease? I praise it. What if people are impoverished? I praise it. I praise the world. And I suppose I'm given to that. I'm hooked on it. I can't stop. I can't stop praising whatever terrible things are happening. I find praise in them. My poem, Because, which is in the marble bed, it's been reprinted a number of times. It speaks of that. When the schoolyard is charred by vandalism, children are still playing in it. There's got to be a way to praise whatever ugly, horrible things there are in the world. And I suppose that's my philosophy. I don't have any specific religion. I have them all. And I think that jazz is a form of praise. For me, jazz comes through as a praise of all people. And it comes through louder than any street sirens or any mess that the world is in.
Which reminds me of the famous lines, will there be singing in the dark times? Yes, there will be singing in the dark times. There will be singing of the dark times. And I was thinking in broadly, as Alice was talking about, this conversation, I was thinking, what do I think is the purpose of writing? Of poetry in general, right? And recently a friend asked me about what do you think is the purpose of my poetry, and I was not even like serious. I was like half joking, and I told her, I think for now, purpose of my poetry is to remind myself and my reader of something that was inside them this whole time, but they had forgotten about it. And whatever that is, what that is, I do not know. Whether you want to call it divinity or just consciousness in general, or nature, as one big entity, but something like when I read something that really moves me, I feel really connected to the voice, the character, the poet. But I feel like there's also a bigger connection that transcends, in some ways, the personhood or the story itself. The best ones always do that for me. And I was wondering what you guys think, like how you approach this purpose of your own writing in general.
Because I write in the tradition of realism, I think what I do best as a writer and what I look for and what I read is a consciousness that looks closely at the world and shows me something I haven't seen that's been right in front of me. And the writers I admire do that. And I think that's the thing I'm seeking to do in my own work as well, is to look closely in the world, to notice everything and to reflect back what I see. Grace, how would you answer that?
Well, bouncing off Jennifer's comment, the poet is one who sees, to see everything, and not be afraid to look at horror. The painter Chaim Soutine looked at horror and painted horror in order to see something transcendent in that horror. An unflinching gaze, actually. To see, constantly to see.
Boy, you guys moved it to a deep discussion there. How wonderful. It's so enriching, and I really appreciate it so much. I have a couple, pardon me?
That's a superficial question.
I'm going to ask you a superficial, I'm so glad you said that, Grace, because actually it's a good question, but it's not. Well, Denise asked, I'm reminded of a discussion I recently read about genre. Do writers choose a genre, or is a genre a marketing tool, a means to categorize books?
No, I'm chosen by everything I write. Genre chooses me. Poetry chooses me. I don't choose anything. In fact, I seldom think that I write at all. Somebody else is writing. Somebody else wrote that line that I like and keep. I can't believe that I've written it. I don't, in other words, I don't think it's an act of deliberation, of choice.
I don't think about genre either, and certainly in the world of novels, publishers think a lot about genre and classifying stories. But there's I think only a subset of stories that I am drawn to tell, that I'm able to tell, that I'm the right person to tell. And I never think in those terms, like is this a speculative story, or is this those are not ideas that cross my mind when I'm writing. I think that it really has more to do with publishing.
Samyak?
I was thinking, Denise, when you said part about whether it's just a marketing tool, and I'm someone who does not have a book yet, and I'm a poet, so you have to take my answer with a grain of salt. But for me, I think any kind of labeling, right, genre, subgenre, forms, I think they're really important and useful as a starting point. But after some point, you have to be able to move beyond that. So if even by the end you're just stuck with the notion of, oh, what genre it is, then I feel like that something is not working. And I mentioned this. I think starting point is important because um, maybe I think it might be helpful if I mention some subgenres, right? For instance, I mentioned devotional poetry, Grace's work. So, for instance, I'm working with Gazaban, which is a small play on Haigh, and knowing the form of Haigh and the conventions
Oh, yeah.
that it is a travel log, right? That the
Mhm.
and the fact that the place becomes the character, and then it always ends on this meditation at the end of the haiku, right?
Like
Uh,
Basho's
Basho, Isa, right? So primarily, not primarily, but
interesting.
Japanese form by origin,
Interesting.
and um, having that knowledge, knowing that conventions, I think is really important. And I'm moving slightly toward form, partly because the project I'm working on now, part of it is partly poetry of exile. And for poets of exile, the form, uh, I find that form is increasingly important because the form becomes a home. So if you look at Aga Shahid Ali's work, he brought ghazal to the
Mhm.
west, right? And and partly he brought home with him with the ghazal, and partly he took himself back to home by going to that home and bringing here, right? So now when I work with Gazaban, um, why did I choose ghazal instead of haiku? Um, for me, ghazal, I'm from Nepal, and um, I grew up listening to ghazals, Hindi, Nepali, Urdu, and ghazal feels more home to me. So instead of the haiku, I have the ghazal, and somehow that feels very much natural and organic to where I come from and what my consciousness is naturally coming from and adapted to.
Mhm.
So this is really taking your answer to something else in a way. But
No, it actually leads into the last question of the evening. And what are you reading?
Hmm.
What are you currently reading? I own a bookstore, so I have to ask that question because I always want to know what people are reading.
Oh, I have mine right here. So this is this brilliant novel,
Oh,
Small Things Like These, Claire
yes,
Keegan. It's so good. It's
I
so
know.
good. It's a slender little novel, and you'll remember it for the rest of your life. It's kind of a little miracle. So this is my current reading, and I recommend it highly.
I do too. The others?
Wisława Szymborska, a
Hmm.
great
Appropriate.
poet,
Yeah.
Nobel winner. She's wonderful, wonderful. I can't get enough of her. I'm addicted. It's worse than addiction. I wake up and sleep with Szymborska.
That's a wonderful feeling, though,
Mm.
loving to read something.
Oh, it is.
Samyak, what are you reading?
I mentioned Shaga is Ali, so
Yeah.
I'll definitely advocate for this is his collected works.
There you go.
Oh,
For
the big sweet by what is that? Shahid?
Aga Shahid Ali,
I knew him well. Aga Shahid, he's wonderful. And
he,
he once got a whole bunch of poets and proselytized the ghazal and had us all writing ghazals for at least, for years. And we finally, when Shahid was sick and dying, actually, we wrote a ghazal chain to give to him. And I was appointed to bring it to him in Brooklyn. The chain of ghazals, which American poets wrote for him. He brought not just any old ghazal, but the true form of the ghazal, the true ghazal, as it really should be written, with all of the features of the ghazal, um, to America, to American poets.
You all are amazing. There have been so many intersections in the discussion this evening, and I want to thank you all. And I hate to close it off, but it's just the end of the evening. So thank you all for sharing your work with us, and thank you all for sharing your discussion with us. And thank those of you who have attended this evening. I really appreciate you. I want to thank Grace, Samyak, and Jennifer for participating in Right America this evening, to everyone who tuned in tonight. And thank you to Roger Rosenblatt, most of all, for creating this original and important series to look forward to each and every Monday evening. Tonight's episode is the perfect example of the purpose and mission of Right America. We hope to see you next Monday at 7 as we welcome Robert Reeves, Jill McCorkle, and Magdalene Brandeis. Please remember to check out Bird's Book's Right America page, where you can sign up for an upcoming episode and maybe purchase a book. Thank you, and have a safe and happy evening.